Hello and welcome to Class Time. Watch us live every weekday from 9 to 10 a.m. on TVJ, YouTube, and on onespotmedia.com. There's also the School Time channel on OneSpot Media, and you can keep up with us on our various social media platforms and use the hashtag to make queries or answer online questions. I'm Nicola Bailey Blackstock. Let's begin today's English lesson. Now today we're looking at writing letters of advice. Now, have you ever been placed in a situation where you are giving advice or you're asked to give advice? Right. Now we're going to be looking at the fact that persons actually ask for advice and persons respond, right, by writing a letter of advice. But you know the routine. We look at the lesson objectives before we get into the lesson, right? Because we want to look at all the things that we should learn by the end of the lesson. All right. So students should be able to, 1, state what is a letter of advice. 2, explain why letters of advice are written. 3, list the steps involved in writing a letter of advice. And 4, express understanding of the concept by writing a letter of advice. Now, what is a letter of advice? Right now, as I mentioned before, have you ever given anybody any advice, whether they ask for it or not? Right? What do you think a letter of advice is? Let us learn. Advice is a recommendation, guidance, an opinion, a proposition, a suggestion, or wise words. One can ask for advice from anyone or to anyone whom he or she thinks fit to get guidance. Now, the burden is on the advisor that what kind of recommendation he gives to the other. When someone asks you for an advice, it is your duty to be honest and sincere. Now, you have persons there, so before we get to that, we need to understand what the word advice means, right? And as it says here, advice is a recommendation, guidance, opinion, proposition, suggestion, right? Or wise words. Now, what we need to understand is that not everybody asks for advice, right? Somebody may be going through something, they did not verbalize, right? They did not come to you. Don't give them any advice, right? If they didn't ask for it, don't give. And you have persons who are like that. Persons do not ask for your advice, yet you take it upon yourselves to be giving advice, right? Remember, it's all about being polite and being considerate of other person's feelings and so on. Now, if somebody didn't give you advice, don't give any, right? If it's your friend and you and your friend have a particular relationship, then fine. But if it is someone that you don't know, I'm suggesting that you don't give the advice, because sometimes, the words that you use, yes, throws the persons off. A letter of advice can be of 2 types, in personal capacity and official capacity. In official capacity, advice could be to subordinate, to a customer, or even your opinion can be asked by a higher authority. In the personal capacity, advice could be in the shape of encouragement, for motivation, to take an opportunity, or to avail a chance. All right? Now, what we need to understand, based on what is said here, is that we have 2 types of advice: personal, right, and official, right? So think about it: personal advice, official advice. Now, it states, right, what is the difference between an official advice and a personal advice. Now, think about it. In your situation, right, or just here we're learning, think about it. What would be some of the advice that would be personal and would be official? Now, for me, I'm thinking 2, as it relates to official, like lawyer, client, right? Yes, I'm having a legal issue, right? And I would seek counsel with a lawyer, right? That would be official advice, right? Personal advice now could be, I'm having some difficulties, say, at home, right? And I would be seeking some advice from, say, my friend, right? So that would be personal, right? So think about it, 2 types of advice, personal and official. No matter in what capacity you are writing a letter of advice, the burden lies on you to give a positive response. Before responding to such a request, you should think about it. But the letter should not be delayed. You should choose your words carefully. Do not try to be judgmental. Now, what we need to learn or to understand is that if you are asked or someone asks for your advice, right? As I mentioned before, you need to take the person's feelings into consideration, right? And don't be judgmental, right? You don't want the person to feel worse than they already do, right? So you have to choose your words carefully, right? And as I mentioned, be subtle, right? You're going to be telling them the truth, but it is how you go about giving the advice and telling them the truth that makes the difference, right? So we have to think about how or take other person's feelings into consideration. Put yourselves in the other person's position. How would you feel if someone did not take your feelings into consideration? You ask them for the advice and it just hammering at you. No, right? You wouldn't like that, right? So when you're asked, right, for advice, please take into consideration the person's feelings. Make the person believe that you really care about him or her and the opinion you are giving is based on the sincerity. If you consider the topic sensitive, you should consider your approach carefully and avoid strong language. It's better to restrict your opinion to the subject that has been asked. Do not add other aspects to it. Now, thinking about what are some sensitive issues that we need to take into consideration, right? If someone is asking for advice, right? Say, for example, somebody is asking advice on like weight loss or so on, right? Don't say, why? Yes, man, you're fat, and you should have lost the weight a long time, and go to the gym, and whatever. No, you would not do that, right? You have to take the person's feelings into consideration. Yes, you see that, yes, the person is obese and they're having health issues and so on. Yeah, take time with them, man. Yes, right? Be careful about how you go about it, right? Remember, you're dealing with people and you're dealing with their feelings, so you have to be very, very careful. If you have been requested for an opinion about something that you do not like personally, you should not mention it or point it out in any way. Stay respectful, polite, and helpful. Do not give your personal opinion on any matter unless you are asked to give. I did mention this already, right? You have persons out there who are like that, right? As I mentioned before, the person did not ask you for your advice. Or say, for example, you're in like the cafeteria and you hear 2 persons talking and you butt in, right? 2 persons are talking about something sensitive and you butt in, right? And as I mentioned before, something about a topic about like weight loss, you hear these 2 persons, talking, and the person is, taking the person's feelings into consideration, and you come in and butt in and say, yeah, man, you should lose weight long time, man. Yeah, man, go gym, man. One gym cross the road, man, go on, right? How can you do that? The person was not talking to you. Your advice was not asked for. So how are you going to be giving advice about something that you weren't asked to give advice about? The person wasn't talking to you. You have to take these things into consideration, right? You go and blab now. The person is already feeling, hurt, upset about, the fact that they're obese and so on, and you come now with yourself, right? Yeah, man, go on a gym. A long time you should lose weight. Like, how would you feel if that was done to you, right? Take person's feelings into consideration. And the most important thing, if you weren't asked for your advice, don't give it, right? The person never asked you for them advice, don't give them, right? Some persons are just too much, right? So if you were not asked for the advice, do not give it. When you are requested for an advice, right? So if you're asked for the advice, no problem. The person asked for your advice, right? Maintain a tone of appreciation and assure the person that whatever suggestion you are giving is in his or her interest, right? So the person comes to you and asks you for your advice, right? Be appreciative. Right? Use a tone that, the person will appreciate, right? Don't be too loud, right? Don't be too, judgmental or, right? Your tone, use a tone of appreciation. Let the person, feel good that they came and they asked for your advice, right? Assure the person that, I am just here to help, right? And, I am putting you first, right? I'm just, trying to help you as best as I can, right? So, take time, right? Be subtle. Show that you care. Show that you understand, right? If you are unable to comment or give an opinion on any request, show your regret and clearly mention that you are not able to advise on this matter, but do not give a wrong advice to anyone. All right. Now, somebody comes to you, and other persons tend to do this, especially about legal issues, right? You have some persons, say, for example, they're living in a house and, the landlord has given them, an eviction notice, right? And, the person comes to you and says, I was given an eviction notice. You can't tell me what is it that I need to do? And you will tell the person, all right, them evict you, not pay no rent, don't pay any rent, and destroy the house and whatever. You don't know what are the legal ramifications. You do not know what it is or the steps that should be followed in an event like this. Just simply say, I know nothing about this situation. I would suggest that you go to, rent board and talk to somebody there, but I cannot give you any advice on something that I know nothing about, right? Don't give anybody any wrong advice because you can get the person in trouble, right? So if you do not know anything about the situation, don't give the advice, please, right? So here it says, show your regret and clearly mention that you are not able to advise on this matter, but do not give a wrong advice to anyone. So there's nothing wrong with you saying, I don't know anything about this because I've been through this already, right? Persons come to me and ask me my advice on certain situations. I say, to be honest, I don't know. Just call so-and-so, call this organization and ask them, or maybe try somebody else to see if they know what it is that you should do. Just be honest. If you don't know if you don't know anything about whatever is being asked of you, don't give it. Right? Because you can get the person in trouble. Right? So here it clearly states, if you are not able to give the advice, show your regret, apologize. I genuinely don't know what to do in this situation. Ask John and see if John can help you. And if John can't help you, I suggest that you, try somebody, who you think would be able to assist you in this regard. All right? How to write a letter of advice. Now, one thing that we need to consider is that, yes, again, with all the letters that we have been looking at so far, is that, you have formal letters of advice and informal, or in this regard, as it mentioned earlier, the personal and the official, right? So here it is that we're going to be learning how to write a letter of advice. When writing a letter of advice, you need to consider the tone. This is very, very important. In other words, is it formal or informal? Ask yourself that question, right? So, your friend come to you and ask, a little something, say for example, they're having, some problem at home or whatever. Yes, right? Think about it. Is this situation, is it formal, right? Or is it informal? So we need to think about these things. To be honest, this sort of letter is going to be informal in 90% of situations, right? Yes, right? A lot of advice that persons give are informal. However, sometimes you might want to be a little cautious and go with semi-formal, particularly if the advice is on a serious matter, right? So what we're saying here is you should try to determine, yes, it is informal, but it depends on the type of situation. Say, for example, say your parents are strict and, you can't deal with it much longer, think about it. Is it formal, informal, or it could be the advice that I would give, if I'm writing the letter, would I use the informal way of doing it, right? Or the semi-formal way of doing it? So we need to take these things into consideration, right? So, however, as it mentioned, sometimes you might want to be a little cautious and go with semi-formal, particularly if the advice is on a serious matter. You will also need to think about structure. There is no single formula for a letter structure, but generally you should consider the following: an appropriate greeting, a short paragraph stating the purpose of the letter and why you are writing, logical body paragraphs that address the bullet points, an appropriate sign-off, right? Now, as with the letter, right, you should have your address, the date, the salutation, right, the body of the letter, and your closing, right? So all of these, we need to remember that we're writing a letter, right? So even though it is informal or personal, it is still a letter that we're writing. So we need to take these things into consideration, that the address should be there, the date, the salutation, the body, and the closing. All right? Now, when we're writing the letter now, right, the introductory paragraph 1, thanks for the letter / express understanding of the problem. Main body, right, 2 to 3 paragraphs, right, giving your suggestions and reasons, right, conclusion, final paragraph, right, closing remarks, right? And then now you close off your letter giving your, your sincerely or your friend so and so, right? Now, as I mentioned before, it is a letter that you're writing. And remember too, as with everything that we have been looking at so far, the word concise keeps coming up, right? Yes, you're giving your advice, but get to the point. Don't go on and on and on and on and on, right? The person needs the advice, they need to know, what it is that they should do and so on. Don't, go off tangents. Stick to you giving the advice, stick to the point, right? Don't go off, don't veer off the track, right? Just give the advice and whatever it is. So here it says the introduction, paragraph 1, thanks for the letter / express understanding of the problem. So whatever problem is there, say, okay, then I understand this problem that you're having. Right. Main body, right? 2 to 3 paragraphs giving your suggestions and reasons. Then you have your conclusion, which includes the final paragraph, which would be your closing remarks. And then now you close off your letter, right? So we need to, as I keep mentioning, that we are writing a letter, all right? Now, when we come back from our break, we'll go through all of this. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more English language. Welcome back. Let's continue with the lesson on writing a letter of advice. All right, so we're looking at, how to structure the letter of advice. Now, I can't say this or stress this enough. It is a letter that you're writing. So say, for example, the person wrote you, right, asking your advice, right? You're going to respond or reply by writing them a letter of advice. So we looked at before what it is that we should, or how it is that we should structure our letter. Now, we need to remember, yes, it is a letter that we are writing, right? A letter, right? So all of the things that should be included in a letter should be there, right? The address, the salutation, the address, the date, the salutation, the body, and the closing, right? All right. So we're looking at, how it is that you're going to be structuring the letter, giving you more details now. Opening remarks. For the formal letter of advice, for the opening remarks, you could use, thank you for your letter, requesting. I am writing in reply to your letter, asking for advice about. I hope the following advice will be of some help to you, right? Informal now. I just got your letters and I think I can help you. I was sorry to hear about your problem. Here's what I think you should do. All right. Now, remember that, as it says, 90% of the advice that is given is informal, right? But in in a lot of instances, or in some instances, you may be asked to write a formal letter of advice, right? And if you are asked to write a formal letter of advice, here it is showing you how it is that you would begin, right? The letter of advice, right? If it is formal, right? And if it is informal, these are some suggestions as to how you would begin the letter of advice. All right, formal. I strongly recommend that. I would suggest that. I believe the best course of action is. I would advise you to. You should. You ought to. If I were you, I would. And this would be words that or phrases that you would use as it relates to you actually giving the advice now. So this is how you would begin, right? Giving the advice, right? So as it says, I strongly recommend that. I would suggest that. I believe the best course of action is. I would advise you to. You should. You ought to. If I were you, I would. Informal. Why don't you? It would be a good idea to. What you should do is. How about? I think you should. It should be think that should be there. I think you should. The best advice I can give you is. Right? So these are some things that you can take into consideration when you're, as it relates to, opening your opening remarks and actually the body of the letter of advice. Closing remarks now. For the formal letter of advice, I trust you will accept this advice. I hope this will be of help. I would very much like to know if this was helpful, right? Informal. Hope this has helped. Let me know what happens. All right. Now, there's nothing lengthy that we have to look at as it relates to the letter of advice, but then, we need to know how it is that we structure the letter of advice. So we looked at, how it is that we should structure it. We have to take into consideration that, yes, it is a letter that we are writing, right? And, how it is that we go about structuring the letter of advice. So we had different examples as to how to help you to, how to begin the letter, right? How to begin the body, right? Actually giving the advice now, right? Now let us look at this letter, right? Writing a letter, giving advice. Situation. A letter to give advice. Your friend, Pat, who has just moved to Canada, has sent you a letter to ask you for some advice about choosing a friend. Now, when you listen to this scenario or when you read this scenario, what type of advice are you going to be giving? Now, this is something that you need to take into consideration. Now, reading the scenario, let us read it again. Your friend, Pat, who has just moved to Canada, has sent you a letter to ask you for some advice about choosing a friend, right? Now, as I said, it is very, very important for you to determine whether it is a formal advice that you're supposed to be giving or is it informal. Now, in this case, what type of advice are you giving? Formal or informal? I would think that it is an informal advice that you're giving, right? Because, in this capacity, your friend, right? And then not only the fact that it is your friend, because you can give your friend official advice to, right? But it is not just the fact that it says your friend, but you have to read on to determine what type of advice, you are giving. So it says, has sent you a letter to ask you for some advice about choosing a friend, right? So I would think that this would be informal, right? So you are going to be writing an informal letter of advice. Now let us see what this person has advised, right? This is the actual letter. The friend Pat is asking for the advice now, right? So here it says, Dear Chris, I am feeling very unhappy. Can you give me some help? I have arrived in Canada for 3 months, but I still don't have any friends. I have tried very hard to make friends at school, but people don't like to talk to me. I don't know why. People here are so different from the people we can find in Hong Kong. I don't know how I can make friends and whom I can make friends with. You are always a very popular student at school. Can you tell me something about the ways I can make friends? Whom I can make friends with? Where I can make more friends? Please give me some advice. Love, Pat. No. Pat is asking for the advice, right? So she's soliciting the advice from who? Who is she asking the advice from? Chris, right? So here she has written the letter asking for the advice. Now remember, we looked at the fact that, if the person is asking for your advice, don't give it. But in this situation, Pat has asked for the advice, right? So she has asked her friend Chris for advice, right? So she's having an issue with making friends in school. She has moved, right? She has migrated from Hong Kong, right? And she's now living in Canada. And she's having some difficulties making friends or forming friendships, right? And she is asking Chris to give her some advice as it relates to making friends, right? Because Chris is a very popular person, right? So, she's soliciting the advice from Chris. Now, here is what you are required to do. Now, you are going to write a reply to Pat's letter. To help you, an outline is given. Use the outline to make a writing plan. Now, what is the outline? Right? The outline is the fact that you're writing a letter, What are the things that you should include when you're writing a letter? What are the important parts of the letter, right? So you have the outline already, right? The outline is up here because we have been looking at letters, right? So you know that, okay, then it is a friendly letter, right? So, it's one address that you should have, fair enough, right? So your address, right? So you need to have your address, the date, the salutation, the body, and the closing. I cannot stress this enough. Now, there are many times, students, when, you're asked to write a letter and you have the address and the date, the salutation, the body, and there is no closing. Would you consider that a complete letter? If there is no closing, I wouldn't, right? So we have to take these things into consideration. Now, we're looking at the fact that we're giving advice. Now, Chris, right, is being asked to give Pat some advice. Now, if you were in Chris's position, what advice would you give Pat? Right? She doesn't know how to make friends, right? She has moved to a different country, right? How things are in Hong Kong, they're different in Canada, right? And she's lost, right? She wants friends, but she doesn't know how to make them. If you were in Chrissy's position, what type of advice would you give to Pat? Write it down, right? Write down the types of advice you would give Pat to help her to make friends. All right, look at this. Look at this, right? So we have the writing plan here. So Chris is responding. Dear Pat, I am sorry to hear about your problems. Please do not worry. There are several things you can do to solve the problems, right? It's very common for students to have problems making friends. If I were you, I would, right? So here it is giving you an outline as to how to structure the letter, right? How to respond to Pat. Now here it says it is a detailed outline, right? So once you see this, this is a good example to have, a good outline to have so that you will know how to structure your letters of advice. Now, in the first paragraph, show that you read Pat's letter. Show sympathy and support, right? So you would start off by saying, I'm sorry to hear about your problems. Please do not worry. There are several things you can do to solve the problems, all right? Now, this is the first paragraph, the introductory paragraph. Now, do you remember what I mentioned earlier about you being sensitive, right? Taking the person's feelings into consideration, right? Watch your tone, right? Show a level of appreciation about the fact that this person has asked for your advice, right? Do not begin giving the advice by being, blunt and insensitive. What is your problem? Why can't you make friends? Just go up to somebody and talk to them. No. If the person wasn't having a genuine issue, they wouldn't have approached you. Be sensitive. And if we look at this letter, right, or this letter, this response to Pat, we would see that Chris is being sensitive, right? Appreciative of the fact that Pat has asked for advice, right? So I am sorry to hear about your problems. Please do not worry. There are several things you can do to solve the problems. So these are examples of things that you would include in the first paragraph. Now, in the second paragraph, right, show that you understand Pat's problem. Offer her some advice about this problem, right? So we're showing you an outline now as to how to structure the body of the letter of advice. And remember that this is an informal letter of advice, right? Because Chris is giving the advice to his friend, and he was able to determine that it was informal based on the type of advice that was asked for, all right? So in the second paragraph, show that you understand Pat's problem, right? Be sensitive, right? It's very common for students to have problems making friends. If I were you, I would, right? So what I would want for you to do is continue to write. What would you do? What advice would you give, right? So if I were you, I would. So you would be telling Pat now how it is that she could go about making the friends, right? Giving her some tips to help her to make friends, right? So what I would want you to do at home is to continue this second paragraph, right? What would you say here, right? If I were you, I would. What type of advice would you give Pat, right? If you were Chris, right? So I would want you to continue the second paragraph for me. All right. Now in the third paragraph, tell Pat what a good friend should be and describe what a good friend does. Now this is very good, right? Because you have some persons who really and truly don't know what a good friend is, right? You have persons who their friends treat them very badly and they think it is okay. So I appreciate the fact that, that Pat has taken the time out to, Chris has taken the time out to inform Pat as to what a good friend should be and describe what a good friend does. Now you see that apparently I'm thinking that, Chris has done this whole advice thing already, right? He has given advice before, right? So he knows what to do. And I appreciate this, right? And if you look at this letter of advice, you would see that, first off, Chris is a good friend. Right? So already, Pat already has a good friend, right? So in the third paragraph, here it is that Chris has written, finding a good friend is not easy. I think you should find someone who is, right? I would say caring, understanding, kind, right? So if you have finished the second paragraph, right? Tell me what are some of the qualities of a good friend, what you would put here in the third paragraph. In the final paragraph, express hope that advice helps the person, right? Now, in this case, Chris is expressing that he hopes that the advice that he has given is or will be of some help to Pat, right? So here he says, I hope this advice helps you. Please write to me again if you need more help. And see, the person has their closing, best wishes, and they would put their name, right? So what I want you to understand is that what we need to learn to do is to determine whether the advice that is being sought after is official or personal. And based on the scenario that is given or that was given, we were able to determine that this advice would be informal or personal, right? Now, what do we understand from this outline or writing plan? Now, I like this writing plan because it details what it is that you should include in each of the paragraphs, right? Now, the only thing that is missing here is the fact that it didn't highlight the fact that you should have had your address and date and so on, right? But everything is there except the address and the date. Everything is there. The salutation is there, the body is there, and the closing is there. Right? Now, as I mentioned before, I like this writing plan because it details exactly what it is that you should include in the letter of advice, right? And we have already determined that this type of advice that was given by Chris was personal. All right. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be doing practice, straight practice, right? Because we want to perfect all of this, right? We need to know what it is that we need to do when we're asked to write a letter of advice, right? Now, before we get to that, we're going to be looking at, other examples of letters of advice, right? Sample letter asking for an advice, there, and your name is there. You would put, and this would be the salutation. I would like to ask you an advice about me joining a company in Dubai. Now, what is happening here? This is not the letter of advice. This is the letter where someone is asking for the advice. Now, as I mentioned before, if someone wrote you asking about something, asking your advice on something they're writing, right, with an email or they sent a letter through the post, right? I would think that if the person took the time out to write to you, you would write back, right? Write back. And as I mentioned before, be polite. If the person asks for your advice, read it and ensure that you offer advice, right? Don't just discard it and whatever it is. Now, when we come back from the break, we're going to be looking at this in its entirety. So we're going to take a break. We'll finish up when we return. Welcome back to class time. Let's continue. So before the break, we were looking at this sample letter, right, where this person is asking for advice, right? They're soliciting advice from someone, right? So this is not the letter of advice, but this is the letter where the person is asking for the advice, right? Now remember, before we went on the break, I was saying, if the person, took the time out to write you, to ask you for the advice, read it and reply. Right? So if you can't give the advice, if you don't know anything about it, express that you don't know anything about it. And then, let's let them know that, okay, then you understand, but you're unable to give the advice because you know nothing about it. Right? So here it is that this person is asking for the advice, and then now the person would respond. All right, now think about this situation now. Your friend is seeking advice on 2 issues that she is having: weight loss and poor performance in English. Write a letter giving advice to your friend on both issues. Now let us brainstorm. Now you were asked to help out a friend in this particular situation, right? Write down what are some of the advice that you would give to this person, right? It is your friend, right? So this person is having, some issues as it relates to weight loss and poor performance in English. What would be the advice that you would give your friend, right? It is your friend, and we are hoping that you would know your friend well enough and would be comfortable enough, to give your advice. And, if you don't know, then politely say you don't know what advice to give in this regard, right? So jot down some of the things that you would mention if you're giving the person advice. All right. Now, let us look at what this person has replied to the friend who is experiencing issues with weight loss and poor performance in English. Now, as I keep mentioning, as it relates to advice, remember, we have to be sensitive, and I cannot stress this enough. It might seem that I'm repeating myself a lot, but then we have to consider people's feelings, right? So as I mentioned, weight loss is a very, very sensitive topic, and we have to be careful about how we give advice as it relates to this topic, right? So we have to consider a person's feelings. And I would suggest that you put yourself in the person's shoes, right? So I'm suggesting that when it comes on to, certain touchy topics, you be careful as to how you respond. So let us see how this person responded. Dear Amy, first of all, thank you for writing me this letter. I am sorry about hearing about your problems. Maybe I can give you some advice and things will get better soon. Your first problem is about your weight. Besides having a healthy diet, I suggest that you could try to do some healthy exercises such as playing games and swimming. Playing ball games and swimming. It is a good way to keep fit and healthy. If you keep on doing these, I am sure you will become slimmer. Besides, you should not mind your own. Everyone has different appearances and, I'm sure you will become slimmer and healthier. Sorry about that. Besides, you should not mind your own appearance a lot. Everyone has different appearances, and you should tell your friends about this. I am sure they will be friendly to you again. Now, I like how this friend went about replying or giving the advice. I like this, right? She was very, very sensitive about this person's feelings, especially about, this touchy topic as it relates to weight loss. I liked how she responded. Your next problem is about your English schoolwork. I think you are afraid of learning English, so you get low marks in English tests. I suggest that you could give yourself more chances to listen and learn English, such as watching TV programs in English. It is not a problem if you don't know the meaning of the words. If you keep on watching them, you will have great improvements in English. All right, now, what I've noticed is that many of these examples that I have been giving, is that they have left off, all the things that are involved in letter writing. For example, the address and the date, right? And in this case, this one is also missing the closing. Now, what I want you to understand is that you're writing a letter. Remember that, writing a letter. So all the things, all the parts of the letter must be involved, right? So think about it. Remember address, date, salutation, body, and closing, all right? Now, I am going to look at this letter and I'm going to say, okay, then I am pleased with how this person responded to her friend, right? She was very caring, she was very sensitive, and her tone, right, was perfect, right? And as it relates to, the sensitive topic about the weight loss, yes, I think she did a very good job here. All right, so read the letter in the advice column below and write your own letter. Now, you have some, in some newspapers and so on, you have where they have advice columns, right? Where persons would write in their problems to this particular person and the person would give their advice, right? So let us look at this one. Dear Ali, I am 14 years old and I usually have arguments with my parents. The problem is that they don't let me stay late at my friends' parties. Last Saturday, I came back home at 11:30 p.m. and they started shouting at me because they had told me to be back home at 10:30 p.m. I don't know what to do with them. Can you help me? Angry teenager. Now, your task, right? Write this down. Your task is the column writer asks readers to write letters of advice to those who face a problem and send them. Write a letter giving some advice to angry teenager about how to deal with this problem. So what I want you to do is to write a letter of advice, right, to Ali, right, or sorry, not to Ali, to angry teenager, right, about what she should do, he or she should do as it relates to the problem that they are having, right? So we need to consider, what is it what advice should I give? And be very, very careful about the type of advice that you give. You don't want to give any advice where the person is going to, or the angry teenager is going to be disrespectful to their parents. So this is your homework, right? You're going to write a letter giving advice to angry teenager about the issue that he or she is having, all right? So that's for your homework. That's all for today, class. We'll be back with more English language on Monday at our regular time of 9 a.m. Take care.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.